Okay, for no reason at all, I'm going to walk you through a bill that is about to be passed in Congress. It is May 11th. This bill is called H.R. 6666. It is the COVID-19 Testing, Reaching, and Contacting Everyone Trace Act is what it's called, all right? So, scrolling down, it specifically reads to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities. Now, when they have to do a bill like this, like a law bill, excuse me, and they use terms like eligible entities, they can take nothing for granted. So they have to fully explain what most, if not all of the terms mean. One of the terms that are defined here are eligible entities. And when they define eligible entities, they define it as, and there are about 7 different sections. One is like school-based health clinic is an eligible entity, an academic medical center is an eligible entity, nonprofit organization, a high school, other things. But the main thing that I wanted to focus on was the last one. It said an eligible entity is any other type of entity that is determined by the secretary to be an eligible entity for purposes of this section, meaning whatever the secretary says is an eligible entity is an eligible entity. So it's up to the secretary to decide the terms of the contract. That leaves a lot of authority in one person's hands, because that's one person's discernment, not a committee. That's never safe when we're talking governmental policies. I digress. So now we come back. It says to authorize the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to eligible entities to conduct diagnostic testing for COVID-19 and related activities such as contract tracing. All right. So now let's find out what contract tracing means. I'm sure they had to define that term, right? The term emergency period. Okay, the term hotspot, medically underserved community. They don't define contract tracing, so we're just supposed to know what that means. So I would have to define contract tracing. Define contract tracing. What is contract tracing and how will it be used for COVID-19? That works. Contract tracing is a little like detective work. Trained staff interview people who have been diagnosed with a contagious disease to figure out who they may have recently been in contact with. Then they go tell those people they may have been exposed, sometimes encouraging them to quarantine themselves to prevent spreading the disease any further. Think of it as part public health work and part investigation. Yes, and we are also keeping track of individuals, right? So just something to keep in mind. So now, where were we? Oh no, did I lose my page? Oh no. Easy, let's go to the history. Cool. All right. So the contract tracing through mobile health units. So they're going to conduct tests in people's neighborhoods through mobile health units, those big like buses where they can go in and they have mobile labs and they can test people's DNA and conduct injections and extractions and what have yous on the go. Trained people to do this, right? All in the name of COVID-19. And they can pass this right away without it going through too much turmoil in terms of a vote and policy and yada, 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 because the president has declared this a state of an emergency, right? And every state has as well, or many states have, excuse me. And so bills can pass now with less scrutiny, as is the case in case of an emergency, because we don't have time for that in an emergency, right? So now it's as good a time as any if you want to pass some laws, right? No comment. So these mobile health units will go to will be as necessary at individuals' residences and for other purposes. So they'll come to your home, individuals' residences. Now, I looked into it and I wanted to see who has priority in this? Like, what's the focus? And I saw that one group in particular has priority. And it says, applicants proposing to conduct activities funded under this section in hotspots and medically underserved communities. So hotspots and medically underserved communities get priority for the mobile testing and tracking. Now, hotspots are typically in spaces where people lack information, education, hygiene, sanitation, or space, right? So not necessarily all of that. It could be any one of those things, right? There are situations where people can't avoid these things. And so these are called hotspots. But these are also typically underserved communities. So now, I wanted to look that up. Underserved communities, what does that mean? The term medically underserved community has the meaning given to that term in section 799B of Public Health Service Act. Okay, so let's just copy and paste that. Control copy. Let's open up a new window because I don't want that to disappear. What section are we looking for? 799B. Let's see if we can find underserved. The term medically underserved community means an urban or rural, I always struggle with that word, rural area or population that A, is eligible for designation under section, another thing, as a health professional shortage area. Health professional shortage area. Or B, is eligible to be served by a migrant health center, a community health center, or a grantee relating to homeless individuals, or a grantee relating to residents of public housing. Very specific who the underserved community is. Has a shortage of personal health services. This is some of the stuff I mentioned, as determined under criteria issued by so they get to determine who has a shortage. Is designated by a state governor in consultation with the medical community as a shortage area. So all these people, these committees decide what a shortage area is. And so the long and short of it is, a bill is about to be passed where people are going to be able to receive grants for their medical companies that will be, as it says in the language, allowed or given the authority to discern who is equipped to do all of this, which means they will hire their own people, including their own security, to carry out their duties. And they will be granted priority if they are headed to underserved medical communities. Is that the term that was used? Sorry, I just want to be sure. Underserved, medically underserved communities. And typically these medically underserved communities have a lot to do with there are community centers or health clinics, and there are public housing, and what were some of the other terms that were used? Migrant health centers. These are typically where our minorities stay, or our people who live near the poverty line stay, or our people who are in the lower class to lower middle class. It's just very interesting how particular that priority is. But I also know the other side of it is, well, we have to protect these people because they can't afford to protect themselves.